Nights at Freddy's recently celebrated its 10th anniversary, a fact that makes me feel old. I've always loved these games. The indie horror classic very quickly found a home in my heart watching Let's Plays back in 2014, and is single-handedly responsible for a new wave of indie game development that we are still feeling the ramifications of today. But for as much as I love Five Nights at Freddy's, I've always hated playing Five Nights at Freddy's. I've been so into these games for so long, yet the actual process of sitting down and putting my hands on the keyboard myself is something that never seemed like fun to me. The time management horror fiasco gameplay loop that Five Nights typically has on offer is not my favorite. The experience is often very punishing and unrewarding, requiring insane amounts of dedication to maneuver through the various nights and unlock whatever tiny tidbits of overarching story we could, a task that I was more than happy to leave to Markiplier. And that's why I was so excited when they announced Five Nights at Freddy's Into the Pit, a video game based off of one of the stories that you could find in the scholastic Fazbear Fright spin-off novels. From the outset, it was clear that this was a different kind of FNAF game, and that alone was enough to sell me on the concept. And more than that, when the game eventually came out during the anniversary week, it quickly skyrocketed to become one of the highest rated titles in the Five Nights at Freddy's lexicon. I was so excited to play this game, but I had to wait a couple of days and circle the wagons before I could truly jump in. But now that I have, does Into the Pit subvert the unhealthy tropes the FNAF series brings to the table to create a solid gameplay experience, or is it just a generic game with a Five Nights at Freddy's coat of paint to sell copies? Let's talk about it. Five Nights at Freddy's Into the Pit has you playing as Oswald, a down-on-his-luck student who goes to school in a town on the brink of economic collapse. Because his parents are always so busy working, trying to make ends meet, Oswald is oftentimes left to fend for himself and wait for parent pickup at Jeff's Pizza, an old rundown pizza place. One day he overhears an older family talking about what Jeff's used to be like, describing a vibrant atmosphere and, more importantly, a secret backroom ball pit, which Oswald quickly sets out to find. Upon discovery, Oswald decides to try and hide in the ball pit to play a prank on his dad, but he exits the ball pit to discover that he has traveled back to a time where Jeff's was known as Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. He plays with the local kids and has an all-around jolly time, but in the back room during a game of hide and seek, he discovers a golden rabbit animatronic and alongside him, the bodies of several of his peers. Chaos erupts inside the pizza place, and while making an effort to escape the rabbit, Oswald's dad gets caught in the crossfire, allowing the rabbit to infect his psyche and effectively hypnotize him, appearing to Oswald as the golden rabbit, but to everyone else as his normal dad. From here, we have our mission. We have to go back to the past and save our dad, as well as whatever other children from the yellow rabbit, while also avoiding him at home. And it's also the first day of school tomorrow, so we have to deal with that. Despite being completely different from how these games are traditionally handled, in a lot of ways, Into the Pit feels like a return to form for the series. We're back to our core trio of animatronics and a mysterious killer, things are more paranormal than they are sci-fi, and the game even seems to take place during an adaptation of the original game's missing children's incident. It's a very comfortable experience, very celebratory of what came before without directly rehashing anything. It's a good balance of fan service and doing something new with the universe. Well, as new as you can be for an adaptation of an existing work. For a series that doesn't really do traditional stories, it's nice to get a simple, easygoing, linear narrative. And bro, the graphics? Into the Pit is absolutely gorgeous. The game blends pixel art with realistic lighting, and the final product creates probably the most visually distinct FNAF game we have had to date. Developer Megacat Studios' whole thing is making new games for older hardware, with Into the Pit starting life as a game meant to be playable on the original SNES, and while that would have been fun, I think they take the best parts of that retro art style and modernize it to create a really effective horror atmosphere. The animation is gorgeous, everything is smooth and flows nicely into each other, and the subtle details on things like the ever-present movement of the character's hair demonstrate a really strong dedication to the medium. I was particularly blown away by how this tablecloth blows in the wind. It's subtle, but I was really captivated by it. And the lighting effects just push this thing to the next level. The way that you can see the light from off-screen windows bleed onto the scene, the way the arcade LEDs envelop the children playing, the way the yellow rabbit's glowing eyes pierce through the darkness. It portrays these characters in a style that we've never seen before, but it doesn't sacrifice that creep factor and manages to feel right at home alongside the rest of the franchise. And that's saying nothing of the full-frame pixel art cutscenes that are sprinkled throughout the game. These are wonderful. They're few and far between, but when they do show up, they always impress. It feels like the art team flexing on us in real time. The art style is undeniably cutesy, something that may disappoint fans of the grungier side of the series, but I would argue that this is just another point in the game's favor. The fact that the animatronics can feel so alive and joyous when on stage, yet freakishly unsettling when they're turned against you after hours, once again speaks to the talent of the animators and environment designers. And because this game has that kinder pixel art style, it can get away with some pretty horrifying imagery and concepts that would be considered a little too much for the mainline series. As a longtime fan of Five Nights at Freddy's, seeing these familiar characters in this new art style is just fun, and there are a shocking amount of characters here to see, with references from all over the Freddy's timeline making appearances. Except for Foxy, for some reason he's not here. Some of the cameos can feel a little forced, but I can't deny that I got the biggest, stupidest smile seeing my #1 crate in the trash heap. The game's art is so good at creating these environments that elicit strong emotional reactions from the player, and they do it all in pixel art, which is just so cool. This aesthetic absolutely carries this game. Like, no tea, no shade, but in comparison to how polished and professional the graphics look, everything else about Into the Pit feels remarkably average. Now I'm fully ready to accept that I'm just a hater and nitpicking and biased, but when remembering back on my favorite parts of this experience, almost all of it has to do with the visuals. Into the Pit is a point-and-click adventure game, and boiling those down to their rawest elements, it's just a gameplay loop of find an item, use it on a thing to get another item, and then use that item on the next thing to get a further item, repeat ad nauseum until the game ends. Except in this one, you do all of that while avoiding a killer golden rabbit. But the thing about that twist is that it doesn't really enhance the gameplay in a meaningful way. What started as an ever-present anxiety about being caught by the killer possessing our dad kind of fizzles out when you're actually tasked with fending him off. You make loud noises to distract him and run. Every now and then he catches you and you play a little mini game to get away. And it's like, this is fine, but as the core mechanic that's ever present, it's a little underwhelming and loses its fear factor after the first couple loops. The gameplay never levels up in a meaningful way. The things you do to dodge the yellow rabbit at the beginning of the game are the exact same as what you do at the end of the game, swiping away 4 identical spiders in the same minigame every single time. And don't get me wrong, the more formulaic gameplay on offer isn't exactly a problem, it just means that the spotlight will instead be on the writing to keep players engaged. Except the writing isn't anything particularly special either. Roughly half the game's runtime is spent outside the pizzeria, interacting with characters like Oswald's classmates and teachers and mom, but Oswald is the only character who has anything going on under the hood. Ultimately, this is a video game adaptation of a short story with an even shorter total runtime, so I don't want to judge too harshly, but I kept having the lingering feeling that everything here was in service of creating these cool set pieces without considering how the set pieces would fit together in a satisfying way. And it's a feeling that left me a little disappointed with the final product. But that could just be me, and really none of it was enough to undermine what I thought was an overall fantastic experience. In recent years, Five Nights at Freddy's has faced similar struggles to something like the MCU. It had a big multi-game saga that got people invested, ended that saga with a bang, and has kind of struggled to find its footing ever since. And if the solution to that problem is more separated, self-contained stories, I'm all in. I love that Five Nights and its books have kind of become the Goosebumps of the modern age, this horror anthology series about the sometimes scientific, sometimes paranormal entities committing atrocities against children, all somehow loosely connected to the comically evil Fazbear entertainment. It's a weird shift from where we started, but when they deliver, they deliver. Into the Pit is the first proper video game adaptation of one of the Fazbear Frights novels, and while this format needs some work, and I know a lot of the longtime fans of the series have a vendetta against the books, my main takeaway from this experience is, I want more. I know not all of the books are winners, but there are some fun concepts there that I think could be expanded into some really interesting experiences. There's already nods to other stories in Into the Pit's secret minigames. Let's pull on that thread a little, see where it takes us. Into the Pit is hopefully the start of a new era for the franchise. It has some hurdles to jump through, but it's a fresh take on an established IP with a fresh art style that somehow manages to feel more faithful to the original vision of the series than years worth of newer titles. And more than that, this This is probably the most accessible Five Nights has ever been. No insane difficulty jumps, no confounding lore that you have to study. It's a simple game format that everyone is familiar with, telling a simple story in a cool way, and for that reason, I have to recommend Into the Pit. It's a love letter to the franchise, released for the game's anniversary. The most video gamey this series has ever been. It's very different from what came before in the best possible way, and it's short enough to leave you wanting more. I still think that I liked Security Breach Ruin more, but Into the Pit happily earns its place on the pedestal of the best Five Nights at Freddy's games. Wait! Before we end today's video, I would like to announce that I'm back on Twitter. For reasons I don't feel like getting into, I've been off the app for a minute and I had to make a new account, but I'm back. I don't love to end my videos on this kind of call to action stuff anymore, but if you want to see me respond to obvious engagement bait or hear my takes on the latest seasons of RuPaul's Drag Race, then you can follow me at RVKennedy. The handle is a work in progress. RVRocks was taken and I couldn't think of anything better, so we're rolling with this. Anyways, see ya!